Let's start with the Institute of Futurization.
The second speaker, which I thought was fascinating, was one of the governors or the owner of the sovereign bank in Nevis down in the Caribbean. And to hear conversations about futurization, whether it's about real estate, but money, banking, he touched on some things that, even though I'm kind of in the loop and in the know of some sorts of things, a lot of what he talked about I thought was conspiracy theories in the past.
What's happening is happening. It just is what it is. We can observe it, we can not like it, we can actually have some fear around it, but ultimately we have to say, okay, given what I see happening, what is my strategy to move forward? How am I going to operate in this kind of uncertain world, if you will? We met a live, real Karen. Holy mackerel. It is a true thing. It was our first, at least my first experience with
our first sighting of a Karen. Yeah. It's like the Sasquatch. You've heard of it, but you don't really know that it exists until you actually have one right in front of you.
Steffany, we're back. A lot of ground to cover. TEDx, speaking event, trip all to Ontario, driving. We just had a lot of things going on this past week. Ryan Holiday, an event we went to, that was cool. And let's recap it a little bit, because within all of that, there's a few lessons we picked up on, a few insights I think are cool to share. And we met a live, real Karen, which I think was just... Go ahead.
Hi, hon.
There we go. Hi. Okay, you're not the Karen, but no. And we can get to that in a minute, but it was literally, we met a real life Karen. It wasn't a TikTok, wasn't a short, it wasn't it was real. And we went, holy mackerel, it is a true thing. It was our first, at least my first experience with
our first sighting of a Karen. Yeah. It's like the Sasquatch. You've heard of it, but you don't really know that it exists until you actually have one right in front of you.
Blew my hair back. Anyways, so we did have, aside from Karen, we had an amazing kind of trip. And it was interesting because there's a lot of lessons within it. So let's do a couple of recaps. So first and foremost, I had the opportunity to speak at an event. It was on a platform and within an organization called the Institute of Futurization. And I spoke to a number of really quite sophisticated business people and investors. And that was really cool. I brought them an economic update, gave my view of where I see real estate going in the future. And that was kind of fun. We then went on to do a TEDx presentation to the youth the next day. We then went on to go out and visit our good friends, the Francoeurs, JG Francoeur and Carrie. We then came back, and on the way out of Ontario, out of Toronto, we stopped and met our good friends, Susie and Chris. And then we got to the airport. So that was all condensed into a 3-day period of time, probably 1,000 kilometers. All of it was worth it. And it was really interesting that we got to show up, do what we love to do, and really re-engage. So where do you want to enter the conversation? Because I think, let's start with the Institute of Futurization, okay? Because I want to share a couple things that I got from that. Number one is, this is an opportunity to step in again with a very sophisticated group of business people and investors, and to do what I do. It's kind of a test amongst my peers, if you will, about the value of what I bring to the table. It was really acknowledged, so I felt like that was a big win. If we look at wins of the week, that was that. A former partner of mine, Richard Dolan, hosted that event. He was the MC of that event, and it gave him and I an opportunity to kind of reconnect under different circumstances. And that was actually quite good. I enjoyed that. And Richard and I were able to kind of heal some wounds, if you will, have some conversation. That was kind of cool. But a big shout out to some of the RAIN members that were there. Tahani Abrane was there. Naran was there, which I thought was great that they came out to support. That was really cool. So I just wanted to shine a light on that. So it really is a test of, how you occur and how you show up for others. The feedback was exceptionally good. It was a bit of a test for me going into that level in that group and then presenting what I do. That was kind of cool. And then, oh, by the way, I didn't step in is that on the Friday night, we had a bit of a social that a good friend of ours, Ken Tucker, arranged. and got together with some RAIN members. We broke bread, and I didn't drink, but many had a beer and a bite to eat. So that was really, really kind of cool. So that's my recap. You were at the Institute of Futurization, which is now a gig, which is they're inviting me to come back on a regular basis. They were very, very happy with the results of that. But what was your experience with it? Because you were there reconnecting with some old friends as well. And what's your thoughts?
Well, I loved seeing you speak on that particular stage. It was a beautiful golf course, kind of very elegant setting. And I think what was interesting for me was, even though you were the keynote, you were opening and Richard was facilitating. It was the first time I've seen Richard in 5 years. So it was really interesting to see how much he's changed and grown. And then the second speaker, which I thought was fascinating, was one of the governors or the owner of the sovereign bank in Nevis down in the Caribbean. And to hear conversations about futurization, whether it's about real estate, but money, banking, he touched on some things that, even though I'm kind of in the loop and in the know of some sorts of things, a lot of what he talked about, I thought, was conspiracy theories in the past, like central bank digital currencies and just 15-minute cities.
Let me interrupt there. And of course, when you have a offshore, because it's offshore banking, and the premise that you're hiding money, which is the furthest thing from the truth. You're not at all. It's all upfront on the table, but it's how it works in the background. So that was very, very, to me, it was a cool a cool presentation, but to actually join him at the table, that was really cool. He's a great guy. So I don't want to take away from what you took away. So go ahead.
No, that was James Lau. He's the president of the Sovereign Bank. And it really gave me lots to think about and to consider, is that where are we going in the future? And to deny that the 15-minute cities or the CBDCs are coming is just naive. We really have to understand what it is that we have to do to make sure that we're not caught on our heels, flat-footed, that we're moving forward, we're preparing for whatever it needs to be in a conversation, which led us to the third speaker, which I thought was great too, Josh. He runs a very large REIT in Ontario, and I have a little bit investment in REITs right now. I have money in 2 different REITs in Alberta, and I love the concept, because what really hit me is that we can be present and we can, be optimistic about the future, but we can't live in the past. And I think we've come a long ways, especially with RAIN and the RAIN members that were there, Ken Tucker and Tahani, and even Erwin was there in the evening.
Erwin Zito,
yeah, we had an opportunity to really get into some conversations with people that are looking to the future. And they're not, none of us have a crystal ball, but they're not afraid. They've got a good solid foundation in real estate. They've learned a lot, especially through the RAIN community. And now it looks like there's people that are ready to take the next step, and to be able to be part of something like that, like you're stepping into, Hun, is that we can still continue to be the cutting edge and be the filter for people, be a space of education. And not experts. You came across as an expert, and I think what was really funny is that you said to the group, a lot of very, very wealthy people in that room, and you said some pretty funny things and some good jokes, and they were just kind of stunned. They were like, and you had to at one point say, that was a joke, right? And they go, ah. But at the end of it, you said, well, sometimes they called me the boom and doom gloomer, or the doom and gloom boomer, and and it wasn't just that. It was like, where do people get the information, the facts, the research right now, if you're not looking past the headlines? And I think that's what you really gave this group of people as they were sitting there listening. It was, you could hear a pin drop at one point, because I think even people at that level of real estate investment, REITs, there was mortgage brokers in there, hadn't really looked at the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years the way that you do.
Yeah, and I think there's a fundamental around all of this, right? Which is, as much as we can go off on a tangent of, the doom and gloom of things, here's the thing about it. The economy is the economy. What's happening is happening. It just is what it is. We can observe it. We can not like it. We can actually have some fear around it. But ultimately, we have to say, okay, given what I see happening, what is my strategy to move forward? How am I going to operate in this kind of uncertain world, if you will? And there's no denying that Russia, Ukraine, the escalation of that, NATO, the US being involved in it, Middle East and that's just that part of it. There's so many different, then you have to look at Israel and Iran. And again, the US involvement in that. Then we have this thing called dollar that's losing value. I mean, there's so many different aspects of it that could really shut us down. But I have to say that as much as, I was tongue-in-cheek nicknamed the doom and gloomer boomer, ultimately, it isn't about that at all. It's about how do we preserve our wealth? How do we step into what is, which is the economy that it is, and where are the opportunities, and how do we look after ourselves, look after our families? That was a cool conversation. So I don't want to go down that path other than to say that was part of just how interesting it was to see the value and the conversation and how people are looking at the world, because I had several conversations. To your point, when we sat down with the RAIN community overall, there's lots of FUD, the fear, the uncertainty, and the doubt. But at this table, people were taking action. They were doing things. And it was also kind of cool as we hung out with JG and Carrie, and they own a spa. One of the many businesses that they have is a spa in Peterborough. And they're looking at expanding and growing, and how do they do that? And the optimism, and JG, I tease him about being the rose-colored glasses guy, but ultimately he's a guy who's taken action. He's doing things. And then as we visited our other friends, they're looking at, placing capital into really large real estate projects. So it's all to say that, regardless of how the world is, it is what it is. It's up to us. How do we react? So this goes back to one of the other things we did was we went and saw Ryan Holiday. And of course, Ryan Holiday is all about the Stoics and Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Socrates and all of the things that we talk about. How do we not just survive, but actually thrive in a market like this? And how do we keep a great mental perspective of what's going on in the world? And so that's all to say that we come back to this time of being reflective. Now, we'll come back to that conversation, but I want to talk about TEDx, because we spoke to TEDx, what they referred to as TEDx Youth. We were at University of Waterloo, and I'll let you lead with that.
Well, it was such an honor, first of all, to be invited. So Fatty and his team and his son, Nicholas, who actually I think is 18 years old, is the one who applied for the license, jumped through all the hoops to get it, and got it with a lot of tests along the way. So he had to go through some adversity and then really start to plan what it was going to look like, invite speakers, and to follow the protocol. TED's a very strong protocol-driven company, and you can't step out the line. I mean, you have to actually stand on the red dot when you're doing your, when you're doing your talk. And the fact that they had a prompter and we were able to use a slide deck was really great. But many of these TED Talks, people don't use decks. They just go and they riff. Yeah. But what happened when I got there and I realized that not only was it organized by Nicholas, who is, a young man, 18 or 19 years old, I think. Every person that he had on board was a volunteer, and they were all under 20 years old. And to me, I was so inspired and so excited to know. And that's what I love about working with youth, whether it's in my hockey programs or in our figure skating programs or working with athletes or just young entrepreneurs, is that there are opportunities out there, and they're really good people out there, and kids that are motivated and fired up. So I have optimism and hope for the future. And I look at my friends that have teenagers and young adults, and I say, you know what, they're really, really good people. And how we show up for them matters, and how we support them matters. And, are we giving them our best selves? Are we putting pressure on them? Are we judging them for what we perceive they don't know or what they do know? But just take a moment and look around you, if you're listening to this right now, about where are the youth in your life, and just how can we continue to inspire them? Because that is the future. I don't want to be that person that says, oh no, who's going to look after me in my golden years? And, I look around and I go, there's some really, really great kids out there, and I'm excited for our future, and I had a lot of optimism.
Well, what I got out of that was, the experience and observing the kids, and these young men and women, young boys and girls, whatever the terminology is appropriate. But ultimately, I was so impressed. This was a team of, I don't know, there were probably 8 really kind of key drivers of this initiative. Nicholas was the star, but I could not believe the wisdom, the maturity, and how they responded. You know, of course, I've done events, you've done events. I mean, I've been doing events for 20 plus years. I know the pressure. I know what happens when you're trying to create something from nothing and then having to pull it off. I mean, it's one thing to have the great idea, let's do a TEDx, and then you have to execute within these very, very stringent, tight protocols. And I observed the kids, and, you know, my whole goal there was to show up and bring energy into the room. I spoke to ethos, I spoke to mindset, I spoke to who you're being in the context of whatever it is you're doing. But I observed these kids and I went, who these kids are being is future leaders. I was left very, very inspired by these kids in terms of how they handled situations. I observed closely. We got there early in the morning. Fadi did a great job as they were kind of deciding what to do, and Fadi didn't give him the answers. I mean, he was the adult in the room kind of leading the team. He's a professor at that university, amongst many other things that Fadi does. But ultimately, I observed him, and they're debating this whole thing, and he looked at him, he goes, yeah, he goes, so what do you think we should do? He didn't give them the answer. I mean, the answer was, to us, I think, probably pretty obvious, but to the kids who'd never done this kind of thing before, that they had to discuss it. They had to have a meeting, like a stand up in the moment. We got to make a decision here. We've got like minutes. We've got to make a decision. And so it was really kind of cool to watch how that unfolded. But I saw there's as you know, who somebody really is shows up under pressure.
Always.
And how we see, you know, and how I observed these kids handling pressure was unbelievable. I know adults that would have melted down in that situation. I've actually witnessed adults moving or melting down in these kinds of situations, and they just handled it like pros. Although they were confused, they were very or not confused. They didn't have the decision. How they worked through it was so impressive. Nobody lost their mind. As a matter of fact, Nicholas had to talk a couple of people off the cliff, and I thought it was just so good. Anyways, I don't know where I'm going with that, but it really is a statement of I'm left inspired and optimistic about our futures. And these kids just did a great job, and I was so happy to be able to present and to share some of our insights. You did a great TED Talk. And so overall, I thought it was a great experience, and no regrets doing it at all. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. And this team they crushed it.
They really did. And I'm glad you're my biggest fan. I don't think I did that great, but ultimately we got the feedback we did. And I think where we entered the conversation, to your point, Hunt, is we went there to serve. We went there to support. We knew there was going to be a bunch of kids. We both have a lot of experience supporting youth. Like right from the back in the day when you were a big brother, and, you know, raising the figure skaters, living in our homes, and just creating that space around us that we know that it takes a village. You know, a lot of times we're looking at children and kids and youth and teens and young adults who get isolated, and they get scared and terrified, and they're afraid to take chances, and they're afraid to make decisions, and they just don't know what next step to take. And I really hope that in these types of environments is that people will look at how you can support the youth of today so that they do become the leaders of tomorrow. And I'm not talking young global leaders like from the World Economic Forum politically. I'm talking about the youth, the people that are going to be picking up the jobs, picking up the hammers, being engineers, going to med school, becoming lawyers, whatever it is they need to do, the trades. If they have those skills emotionally, mentally, spiritually, socially, energetically, and they know that there's a group, a circle of support around them that they can rely on, it's going to launch many, many kids into a future that they can really create on their own terms, whether it's through AI or whatever the future is that they're going to create it. And I don't have those limiting thoughts anymore when it comes to, oh my God, let's just shut down and move to Brazil or something, you know, get out of here. It gave me a lot of hope. And yes, I'd love to maybe move to the Costa Rica or something one day, but we're not at that stage of life. But ultimately, when I look around, again, I see the kids, I see the people that are working, even in our small town here, the people that are committed to building the community. Laura, my hairstylist, who's on the board of the Mount Lehman, community, has 2 boys that are part of their family mission is they have to volunteer. And when kids are understanding and understanding that volunteering and contributing and making a difference is going to help them down the road, maybe on a resume, maybe in a job site, whatever, getting an application approved to get into the maybe post-secondary, what you're doing now and what they're doing now and supporting the youth is, to me, again, one of my biggest priorities.
Well, you said something that just kind of jogged my memory around a couple things that we did within our shift coaching program when the different programs that we've had. But along the way, one of the things that we coach and support and walk participants through is having a family mission. You're mentioning of Laura, and part of her family mission is to have the kids participate within the community, but even having a mission statement or a family mission. And the reason I connect those dots to even what I witnessed at the TEDx that we did was because it was obvious that the parents that were there, Fadi, who was one of the, his son was the key organizer, but of course Fadi's in behind the scenes and he's driving that initiative with his own mission for his family. And then what ultimately I think for us was so inspiring as well is that there was a principal of a school there who approached us afterward and was so complimentary to the value of our presentations to the kids. And I think that you and her are going to connect afterwards to say, what else can we do? And, that was her approaching you to talk about the future and what relationship that you can build with them to support these kids. All to say is that when we start to be really intentional about what it is that we're doing, who we're being and what we're doing and how we're going to show up, creating that mission, creating that vision is all part of what develops these kids. Think about the experience that they had, the pressure that they were under. This will set them up for the next time they're feeling that much pressure and having to have the courage to work through it and work as a team to dissect and kind of unravel the challenges that they have to unravel, but doing it in an environment, in a team environment, really clear. So, just a couple comments around that. And I want to just not step over one comment that you made. You reminded me actually of years ago when I was a big brother. So, the young man that I worked with had a great, just an interesting story, interesting background, Jesse. He was 14 years old when I took him on as a little brother. And do you know that he's now 40, by the way, and we still stay in touch. We still joke back and forth, and I tease him a little bit about some of his his way of being back then and who he's become as a man is really quite remarkable and inspiring. And, every so often he makes sure he pumps my tires and says, well, the reason I'm that is because of you. And that always feels good to know that you made a difference. So these are things that we do within the youth and in the young people, and we can actually feel hopeful about the future in spite of what we often see and witness on social media. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but ultimately I wanted to share those insights.
No, it's great. And I think it's looking back and it gives you, a reason to pause and just to check in and have some gratitude for the journey that we've been on. And, to me, the TED and TEDx are such an honor. And I mean, I learned so much from the TED Talks that I've watched over the years. And I wanted to make sure that we honored that process as much as we did. And I think we did a pretty good job.
So I want to just touch on a couple things, one of which was we met an in-person, but we witnessed a Karen going off, and it was like, I'm not going to spend any time on it other than to say that it is really hard to believe that people can be that way. It was, to me, I looked at it and I went, wow, that is the definition of arrogance and narcissism. I couldn't explain it any other way. And to see her go off the way she did was like, holy crap. And it doesn't matter the scenario. It was just so inappropriate. And I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I was kind of left speechless. And
you got up and left the room is what you did.
Fortunately, it wasn't directed at me, and I didn't have that fire to put out. I'm not sure how I'm pretty sure how I would have handled it, but it doesn't matter how I would have handled it. It got handled, and that was the key thing. But It's just somebody.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I don't want to just, I feel bad for all the really nice Karens out in the world who are named Karen, which I know several that are super awesome. I don't know how that came up, like Karen and Chad, like that became a meme throughout the pandemic, right? Where people were making fun. But when you actually see it in real life and somebody that jumps out of their own skin and makes everything about what the scenario or the situation is about them, and trying to express that what their needs are more important to what's going on in the moment. That was, I think, where I lean towards it being super narcissistic. And I don't know if this woman was just trying to be heard. She was trying to create boundaries. I don't know what it was in her. I don't know her history or anything about her. But what I really got to was the incongruency around who she was being when she wasn't being a Karen, and how soft and how nice she was to everybody and all smiley. And then all of a sudden this secondary personality came out when she wasn't getting what she wanted. And it was just so aggressive. And I thought, how does anyone trust who this person is?
I don't know.
Because like you said earlier, stress brings out our true selves.
Well, I think this is actually a bit of a segue into a mic drop moment that I had. And because what you just reminded me of, within the, what do we call it, the meme structure called Karen, they're often victims to whatever's going on. They are the victim of the world treating them a certain way and not following whatever. There's a whole story around it. So let's not beat that one to death. It is what it is. But here's where it kind of is a segue for me. So I often will listen to a Joe Dispenza segment, Dr. Joe Dispenza. I love his body of work, and I've learned a lot from it, and I've actually applied a lot of the stuff that he has studied. He's got data to support it, and that's what's kind of cool about him, as much as it's maybe a little bit of metaphysical or way out there kind of stuff sometimes for some people, it's all supported by data. So whether that, and really it comes back to the base of meditation and the impact of meditation and all of those things. But my mic drop moment is that both you and I really talk a lot about, our life is a reflection of who we are, who we're being. It's a reflection of the decisions we make or we don't make. So in other words, the whole premise of that is extreme ownership, take responsibility for whatever your life is. It's not to blame, etc. But there was a moment. So the whole thing is that we don't hold ourselves as victims. I didn't believe that I held myself as a victim. So when I look at what's going on in the world, in my world, in business or whatever, I mean, there's a lot of things I can blame. I can blame the economy. I can blame a lot of things, but I just am wired now and trained myself not to do that, to actually ask a better set of questions, etc. So here's the moment. I'm listening to Joe Dispenza. I'm kind of dozing off, and he comes up with this thing that says, when we consider anxiety and worry, we're living into the future. We are living into a future story that hasn't yet materialized. In the context of living into the future, especially because it's worry and anxiety, which means that you're looking at the bad news side of things, generally, that's where worry and anxiety comes from. You're actually being a victim to a future that hasn't yet occurred. And I went,
oh, mic drop.
Fox Creek, where did that come from?
Oh, right.
So there you go. So as we wind this down, and I'm going to unpack it a little bit more in a future episode. So think about that. Worry and anxiety, they haven't yet manifested. It hasn't occurred. Everybody knows that it's never as bad as you imagine, or rarely as bad as you imagine it would be. But ultimately, you're being a victim to a set of circumstances that hasn't yet occurred. Farg. I went, that was a big one for me. I went, holy shit, quit it.
Yeah. So there's your version of being a victim.
There's my version of being a victim. Whenever I'm worried about something, feeling maybe a little anxious and anxiety about something, I'm being a victim to, and what's worse, I'm being a victim to a future event or a future outcome that hasn't even manifested itself.
Right. So think of the acronym FEAR, fear, future events appearing real.
Yeah.
They're not even real.
Yeah.
And you're
Forget everything and run.
fear.
Forget everything and
Forget
run.
everything and run.
Anyways, as we part ways, we have to go back to a little bit of Ryan Holiday. What's the term for, what's the Latin term for seize the day?
Carpe diem.
Carpe diem. And so when we think about seize the day, be present.
Memento mori.
Sorry?
Memento mori.
Memento mori. Go ahead. What's memento mori?
You tell me that. Tell me what memento mori means.
Well, if I read it, I would have to read it. It's the ancient practice of mortality. It goes back to Socrates, who said that proper practice of the philosophy is about nothing else but dying and being dead, believe it or not. So it's also about seizing the day and knowing that we're all going to die, live our best life today.
And what my mom always said, you know, Joyce, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
You know, Joyce always said is that tomorrow never comes. Tomorrow never comes, because when it does, it's now today.
Yes.
So if you're putting off to tomorrow and saying, okay, well, I'll just do this tomorrow, I'll start this tomorrow, it never comes. And to me, that is carpe diem, memento mori. It's that being willing to just lay it all on the line today. What does that need to look like for me? Who knows?
Be your best self, live your best life, and reflect. It's all about reflection. Taking a look at who you are, who you're being. Are you living your best life? It's a short one. And on that note, that was a recap. We'll leave it there for now.
That was fun.